Thank you all for joining us for this month's Strengthening Families webinar. And I know that we actually have a lot of people joining us who are not normally part of our Strengthening Families audience, so welcome to you as well. Today we're talking about concrete support at the federal level, everything you need to know about the American Rescue Plan's Child Tax Credit. And I will just do a little bit of introduction before we jump into that topic. Wanted to orient everyone to these webinars. We do this once a month. It's an open invitation to anyone who's using the Protective Factors Framework and coordinating Strengthening Families efforts, whether that's within your own program or agency or for a state or community or a national organization. We jointly convene these between my organization, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. And each month we have a different topic, normally with guest speakers, sometimes just with discussion. We always welcome your suggestions or volunteers to say, I have something exciting I'd like to present on. So be in touch if you have something like that to share. And we always post the recordings and materials from the webinars on this Google site that the Alliance maintains. So keep an eye on that early next week to see the recording and slides and handouts from today's event. A little bit about our upcoming webinars. We do this the second Thursday of each month. In June, we're actually going to use this time for a meeting of Strengthening Families state leads. So if you are a state lead, you'll hear from me. If you're not a state lead, but you think maybe you should be, contact me. That could be that your state is actually not in the network, but you think it's time to join, or you're considering joining, or just that you're not sure who the state lead is in your state, but you feel like it should be you. So get in touch if that's the case. We are not a closed group, but just want to have that conversation among folks who are coordinating that work in their states. And then just mark your calendar for the second Thursday of the month going forward. And once you hear about the topic, you can decide whether to register or whether to open that hour up on your calendar. All right. For today, we have this exciting content about the child tax credit. And I do want to acknowledge we invited our Youth Thrive mailing list. So welcome if you don't usually attend these webinars. Youth Thrive and Strengthening Families, of course, are very connected, or maybe you are coming from another realm where you just heard about this webinar. We welcome everybody who's trying to help families access these new resources and make sure that they can get the concrete support they need that is now available. I'm joined by three of my colleagues from CSSP's policy team, Elisa Meinhoff, Alex Kocha, and Siri Anderson, who will all be presenting this content. We'll have a Q&A, so as they're talking, feel free to type either ideally into the Q&A box, then we will keep an eye on that, either answer it in writing or address it when we get to the Q&A session. We'll keep an eye on the chat as well, but the chat might be more for communicating with your fellow attendees. And then at the end, we'll share some updates of other work going on at CSSP and at the Children's Trust Fund Alliance related to strengthening families and protective factors. So with that, I want to hand off to my colleagues who are going to talk to us about the child tax credit. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Malin. So it's good to be here. Thank you all for joining to learn more about the child tax credit and the really incredible expansions under the American Rescue Plan. Before we dive in to the content, I just want to do some quick introductions so you can get to know us a little bit more. Next slide. So my name is Elisa Meinhoff. I lead our family economic security work on the policy team at CSSP. So we do a ton of work around income supports and have been doing a lot of work specifically on trying to advance a child allowance or a guaranteed income for children that provides regular support for families with children to help meeting the everyday expenses that families face. And as part of that work around a child allowance, we have launched a new coalition along with our co-chairs, the Children's Defense Fund. The coalition is called the Automatic Benefit for Children Coalition, or ABC Coalition. And we have been doing a lot of work specifically around the child tax credit and the child tax credit expansions under the American Rescue Plan, really trying to push to ensure that all families who need it can access this benefit, and that this really sort of incredible new benefit is made permanent. So we'll talk a lot more about the policy in a few minutes, but I'll turn it over to my colleague Alex to introduce himself.
Hi everyone, great to be with you. My name is Alex Koch. I'm a senior policy analyst at CSSP and working with Elisa and Siri on a wide range of family economic security policy issues. So it's good to be with you. Siri?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Siri Anderson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a program and research assistant with CSSP on our policy team. Again, I work on the family economic security work with Alex and Elisa, as well as some of our racial equity TA and institutional analysis work. So I'm going to turn it back over to Elisa.
Thanks. And so we'll hear from Alex and Siri in a few minutes. But just to start, we're really going to dive in to learn more about what the child tax credit expansions look like in the American Rescue Plan and really what they mean for families. And I just want to preface all of this by saying that this is an incredibly exciting moment for those of us who work on economic security policy for children and families. There's sort of rarely been this sort of significant expansion of supports, certainly not in my career before. And this policy has the potential to really be a game changer for families. You've probably heard the reports that the American Rescue Plan is expected to cut child poverty in half. And if that happens, it will be largely because of this policy alone. But as with everything, whether that happens really hinges on implementation. As folks who work in systems, who work in communities and with families, you know better than anyone else just how important implementation is. And in this policy, implementation is key. And in particular, whether the policy advances racial equity, it does anything to move the needle on advancing racial equity really hinges on implementation. So I'll dive right into the policy, and then we'll talk a little bit more about implementation and what you can do in your communities to support families' access to this credit. So just for a little context, as you, I'm sure all know, the American Rescue Plan, which was enacted in early March, this is the latest of the COVID relief bills passed, the first under the Biden administration, and includes a huge number of supports for families with children, ranging from income supports like expansions of the child tax credit and the EITC, and another round of stimulus payments, to incredible investments in childcare, really important new options for states to expand Medicaid, and much more. Incredible investments in elementary and secondary education, and money for broadband access, like the list goes on and on. Next slide, please. But today we're really going to focus in on this policy that is incredibly important for families with children, the child tax credit. And the expanded child tax credit this year really does bring us one step closer to guaranteed income for families with children, providing that regular support families need to meet those expenses raising kids. The child tax credit this year, unlike years past, is fully available to families with no income. Families do not need any earnings to claim this tax credit. That's really important. The full benefit also, sorry, Caitlin, I think this, thank you. The full benefit also goes to families with no income, and the full benefit has been boosted. So previously it was, the full benefit was $2,000 a year for children 0 to 16. Now it's $3,600 a year for young children under age 6, $3,000 a year for children ages 6 to 17. That comes out to $300 a month for children 0 to 5 and $250 a month for children 6 to 17, because the IRS expects to be delivering this monthly starting in July. So families will receive half of their benefit this year via advanced monthly payments starting in July. That's what the IRS has said it will do. And then another half as a lump sum when they file their taxes early next year. Next slide. So just to make this really concrete, what does this mean for families? It means that families will be getting a monthly check from the IRS based on the number of kids they have in their household. So for a family with one young child, age 2, and one older child, age 7, that means they should be getting $550 a month starting in July, running through December. And then they'll get the rest of their expected child tax credit in as a lump sum payment, $3,300 in 2022. Next slide. So we get a lot of questions about who's eligible for this expanded child tax credit. And it's really pretty simple. If you have a child in your household, if the child lives with you for the majority of the year, that is 6 months or more, if the child is under 18 and will stay under 18 through the end of this year, and if the child has a social security number, then they should be eligible for the child tax credit. You should be able to claim that child on your taxes and get the child tax credit on their behalf. There is a relationship requirement, but again, if it's your child or adopted child, a stepchild, a grandchild, a niece and nephew, all of those sort of relationships qualify. Now, from the adult's perspective, the tax filer's perspective, the tax filer doesn't need to have a social security number. They just need to have an ITIN, an individual tax identification number, in order to claim it on behalf of a child with a social security number. And again, families don't need any earnings to get this credit. I say this repeatedly because we get lots of questions from families who are very confused, who are wondering, why do I have to file taxes? I don't have earnings. I haven't worked over the last year. But filing taxes is the way to access this benefit, which I think is the next slide. Oh, it's the slide after this one. So that just to again drive home the point about eligibility, because of the way this is structured, really most immigrant families are eligible for the child tax credit. It's only the child who needs to have a social security number. A parent does not need to have a social security number in order to claim it on behalf of their child. So the parent can be undocumented. If they are undocumented, they will need an ITIN number. If they don't already have one, they can request an ITIN number when they file their taxes. Claiming the child tax credit will not affect a family's immigration status. There's been a lot of concern over the last 4 years under the Trump administration, and many immigrant families have withdrawn from these sort of crucial supports that they need out of fear of the effect on their immigration status and fear of the public charge rule that was released. And it's really important to communicate to families that there are no public charge implications for accessing the CTC. It will not affect anyone's immigration status. The IRS does not share tax filing information with anyone else. There are very strict privacy regulations around any tax filing. And so this is safe for families, and if they're eligible for it, they should claim it. Next slide. We also get questions from families and communities about whether claiming the child tax credit will affect their other benefits. And the answer, for the most part, is no, right? This should not cause issues with benefit cliffs because the child tax credit is a tax refund, and tax refunds are not counted as income when determining eligibility for any federally funded benefits. So not counted as income when determining eligibility for SNAP or TANF, SSI, housing choice vouchers, any program that has any federal funding doesn't count the CTC as income. So it shouldn't affect these crucial benefits. And secondly, we also get the question, especially from families who've had sort of bad experiences with the IRS and having tax refunds clawed back, about whether they'll have to repay this money. And luckily, there are protections for families who, if families are overpaid because the child moves from one house to the next and is no longer living with them this year, but was living with them last year, and so that a family is sent money, they shouldn't have to repay that money if their incomes are under certain thresholds, and those thresholds are here. So if your income is under $40,000 a year, you should not have to repay any overpayments that the IRS mistakenly sends you. So there are real protections built into this. And again, this should all make families feel comfortable claiming this benefit this year. Next slide. So which brings me to the point of how families claim it. And families claim it by filing taxes. This is, again, not necessarily super intuitive for families who don't have earnings or who have very low earnings and don't normally file taxes, but this is the way you access this important benefit. And if families file taxes, one of the great things is they're likely to get other benefits too, right? If they're eligible for the child tax credit, they're likely also to have been eligible for stimulus payments. So if they haven't claimed all their stimulus payments over the last year, then they should get those too. If they're eligible for some EITC benefit, then they should get that too when they file taxes. So there are huge benefits to filing taxes this year, in particular for families with children. Next slide. So how will this work? For families who've already filed taxes, if they filed taxes for 2020 earlier this year, or filed taxes for 2019 last year, the IRS has their information on file. They have their information from those tax filings about the kids in their household. And the IRS will automatically begin sending checks out to the families whose information they have on file from those tax years. That means if families have bank account information on file with the IRS, they should get the money via direct deposit. That doesn't always happen. So they also might get paper checks. And we know that some stimulus payments were also sent out by debit cards. The IRS hasn't said whether it will send out payments via debit cards for the CTC. But for families who've already filed, they don't have to do anything. They'll get this automatically as soon as the IRS begins sending out these checks. And again, the IRS has said it plans to start right at the beginning of July. Now, if families' living circumstances have changed this year, if a child is born, if they take in a niece or a nephew who's living with them this year, and so there are more kids in their house, they should be able to fill out a change of circumstances form that the IRS is going to put on the website. The IRS has said again that we'll put this up starting early July. So if families sort of have the ability to claim a higher benefit, they can update their information online starting in July and get that higher benefit. Now, for families who have not yet filed taxes, and the tax deadline is May 17th, and Siri and Alex are going to talk more about this. For families who haven't filed taxes, they should do so as soon as possible, by May 17th if possible. But if they miss that deadline, that's fine. They should still file as soon as they can. And that's because we think the sooner families file, the sooner they're likely to get their first check from the IRS. There is a chance that the IRS will create a simplified filing portal, something like the non-filer portal it created last year to help families access their stimulus checks. And if the IRS does so, then it will be that much easier for families to file and claim their child tax credit. But the IRS has not said whether it's going to do this yet. So for now, the message to families and to communities is to get families to file their taxes. Next slide, please.
Can I actually break in with a question that came in? Chris Driscoll asked, with the filing deadline around the corner, do you know whether families can file for an extension and still receive the CTC?
Yeah, so families with tax liability can always file for an extension. Families who do not have tax liability don't need to do anything, take an active step to ask for an extension. They just need to file their taxes at some point after the deadline. There's this window from May 17th, which is the official tax filing deadline, through October 15th, when the IRS continues to accept tax filings for 2020. And for a family without tax liability, who wasn't obligated to file their taxes in the first place, they can file anytime in that window. There's no penalty for someone, again, with no tax obligation to file late. So filing anytime after May 17th is fine, but again, the sooner the better because the sooner families file and the sooner that their information is in the IRS's system, the sooner they will begin getting their checks. Any other questions, Caitlin? Okay.
There are a few more that are coming in, but I think they might be things you're getting to. So we'll save them, see if they're answered along the way. So thank you.
Excellent. Next slide. So just one last slide for me before I turn it over to Siri and Alex. I just really want to emphasize how important it is to get families to file taxes this year in order for this benefit to have the expected impact, in order for it to reduce child poverty as people hope it will, in order for it to advance racial equity. We really need to focus on getting families to file taxes. And the reason is that lots of kids live in households that don't normally file taxes. One report said that approximately 5 million kids lived in households that didn't file taxes in 2019. And of course, these kids are disproportionately poor. 1 in 3 children living in poverty lived in a household that didn't file taxes. 1 in 2 children living in deep poverty lived in a household that didn't file taxes that year. Black and Latinx children are also significantly more likely to live in households that did not file taxes. And again, they lived in households that didn't file taxes because their incomes were lower. The families weren't obligated to file taxes. And so they didn't. And so this is really forcing families to sort of reorient their thinking towards the tax filing process and realize, hey, this is something I should be doing, even if I don't need to, technically, even if I don't have tax obligation. And for everyone who works in community, it's incredibly important to do this outreach to ensure that families hear this message and are connected to the resources they need to file. So with that, I'll turn it over to Siri and Alex.
So there's this great policy that can provide a significant amount of money to families. How do we make sure everybody knows about it? How do we make sure everybody knows how to access it? So what can families do? To claim the expanded CTC this year, as Elisa has said, and as we will probably say many more times, families must file 2020 taxes by May 17th, which is Monday, to get their payments in July. And families with no tax obligation, so maybe they wouldn't otherwise file, but are claiming the CTC or stimulus checks, can technically file. Am I echoing?
I heard some background noise. If there's anyone who's not muted for some reason, please mute yourself, but I think you sound okay, Siri.
Okay, thank you. So families with no tax obligation can technically file after May 17th, as Elisa said, but the reason we're still pushing to try to get everyone to file by May 17th is because the IRS has not really been clear about the turnaround time for payments to begin if families do file late. So it's best to just really try to do that one last push to help folks file on time. And then there's a little more information up here about the portal Elisa was talking about, but starting July 1st, people can update their information in the portal if these situations apply. So your child moves, you have a child that's born, changes in marital status, significant change in income, or if you would like to opt out of the monthly payment. And then what can community organizations do? Community organizations and anyone who works with families can help them access the CTC and really make sure that they get the full benefit. So number one, tell families that they're eligible. We have various outreach materials that we can share, and I think may have been shared with many of you already. Telling families to file and also help connecting them with free tax assistance. And there are a lot of barriers to the tax system. So really doing the legwork, calling around, see what organizations have capacity to actually help with the tax filing, making sure families have transportation to get there, or if it's online, help ensure they have internet access or, can navigate the different online services, really making sure there's that warm handoff, and being as specific as possible about what families can get by getting the expanded CTC and being specific about where they can go for help. And it's the same thing with connecting families without bank accounts to financial institutions that they feel comfortable with. That's a big thing that people who work with families can do right now, you know, helping them find places that don't have fees and that are safe and non-predatory. And in the next couple slides, I'm going to share resources both on free tax prep and about banking information. So in terms of free tax prep services, these are all free, which is really important because the money should be going entirely to families. It shouldn't be going to paid tax preparers. And since families do need to file, they may need help, especially because they may not typically file taxes, you know, in other years, or they may not have filed taxes in the past couple of years and need assistance. So VITA is a great resource. It's a free tax prep program that operates locally, and you might be able to reach out to local VITA sites to partner with them. This would really help make sure that families are set up to receive the benefit. You can also look into local legal services organizations and LITCs. And then online, there's getyourrefund.org and IRS Free File. And all of these, again, just reiterating that warm handoff, really making sure it's not just a list of resources, but helping people get really what they need out of these resources. And then in terms of bank accounts, the reason we're bringing this up again is because we want all the money to go directly to families' pockets, to families' bank accounts. So, you know, hopefully families are not in a position where they're paying check cashers to cash the checks they get from the IRS. They can have really high fees, or people aren't in a position where they're using temporary accounts from refund anticipation loans, which can cause the IRS to have out-of-date banking information, and which can also have really high fees. So these are some resources to help people locate safe bank accounts or credit union accounts that are local or online, have little to no fees. And these few resources can really help people decide like what type of account is best for you. So Bank On is really great. They have resources that can just help navigating opening a bank account for the first time, choosing one that's right for you and like your own personal circumstances, navigating different kinds of accounts and fees. And it's a great resource for families who are unbanked that might want to set up an account to receive their regular benefit. And then the CFPB is a great resource for kind of all things related to banking, credit, and financial planning. And one thing that I'll note about them is that they have lots of resources, and most of them are available in many different languages. They're really easy to use, and a lot of them are designed to be printable. So I just feel like that's good to know. And then the FDIC has things that are sort of similar, that are like checklists, you know, what to look for when opening a bank account, how to make sure it's safe and affordable and meets the different needs that you have. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Alex to talk about how community organizations can support families.
Thanks, Siri. So obviously the main message we're getting across now is file taxes ASAP. For those who don't have tax obligation, to still file as soon as possible. There's obviously going to be, as Lisa mentioned, there's going to be a tool that families can use throughout the year if their circumstances change and they'd like to update those circumstances. If the IRS does end up creating a simplified filing tool, similar to the non-filer portal that was created for the stimulus checks this past year, then community organizations can also step up and help families use that tool directly. And so I think it's also worth making sure that service providers, community organizations can begin to make a plan about how they might do that, how they might help families collect any sort of necessary documentation and navigate the form online to sign up. Community organizations also have a huge impact and role in terms of spreading the word broadly about the CTC. I think one thing that we've been trying to keep in mind is, if we want the poverty, the decreases in poverty to be large with this type of policy change, then we need uptake to be high, and that high uptake is also going to have a feedback when we look at the federal level policymaking to try to make this expansion permanent. And so uptake is a huge piece. So one thing that community organizations can do is try to consolidate the helpful information in one place on their website, and make it as local as possible. So we've obviously provided some national level resources that can let you enter your zip code and find service providers, either free tax filing help or banking help near you. But having a consolidated space on the website that has already identified those local institutions is going to be a huge help to families. Also making sure that the language is accessible, and depending on which populations you serve, ensuring that there's relevant translations as well. Another thing to really focus on, especially if you have good connections with your local government officials, is to work with local government to do some sort of public awareness campaign around filing to get the CTC. Local governments, obviously beyond just the massive well-being impacts that this type of policy can have, they have an economic reason to do this. A lot of this money is going to be spent very quickly. It's going to be spent very locally, and it's going to be spent on families to ensure their well-being. We can also hope that community-based organizations work with other organizations in your network, those that might have community health workers or home visitors or ACA navigators, to share the information so that as they're interacting with individuals, they can ask, hey, have you filed? Have you gotten access to the CTC? And if not, they can help support families in accessing it. Again, with this uptake and large amounts of filing so that people are receiving the benefits that they need, community organizations can really help improve policy. So beyond just the nitty gritty of getting people signed up and helping people identify relevant resources, it would also be helpful to collect information. So if you're hearing things about, well, it's actually, these are huge barriers to people accessing. Maybe if you're not a traditional filer, these are the barriers that we're seeing people from filing taxes or receiving the credit, and also successful and unsuccessful forms of outreach. Are sending letters out successful or unsuccessful when you've done more kind of in-person, on the ground campaigns to get people signed up? What does that success and look like? Because then we can model some of those outreach efforts off of what has been successful. We also want to start collecting stories and hearing from families about what has been beneficial. What does the benefit mean to families in terms of meeting basic needs, in terms of providing for children? Those stories are what are really impactful for policymakers, both state and federal officials. And so we want to then share that information with policymakers. And Elisa, in the next little section, is going to talk about some ways that we can help you do that.
Great. So as we work towards really trying to ensure that the most recent expansion of the child tax credit is implemented well and reaches all children who need it, we're also working to try and make these expansions permanent so they can continue to help families meet the costs of raising kids moving forward. Next slide. So as many of you likely heard, President Biden called for extending this child tax credit expansion for another 4 years, so through the end of 2025. We are working at CSSP, and we're working with our partners through the Automatic Benefit for Children Coalition to really push for improvements to the child tax credit so that all children who need it are eligible, and for making this improved benefit permanent. One of our priorities as we look towards improving the child tax credit is making sure that all immigrant children, even those who do not have social security numbers, are eligible for this benefit. So we're really trying to work towards that. We are also trying to work towards ensuring that other children who are currently might not be eligible for things like the fact that they maybe don't live with one taxpayer for a whole 6 months of the year, or maybe they live with a cousin but not a parent or a grandparent or a sibling or aunt or uncle. We want to make sure that all kids are eligible, regardless of who they live with or the relationship that they have to that person. And so we're working on all of these questions, and then we really want to make sure that this becomes a permanent program that helps all families with, the huge costs of raising kids. And as Alex said, there's a lot that needs to be done to push policymakers to really understand how critical this is for families. And using stories that you hear on the ground from families about the significance of this benefit could really help move some policymakers to embrace not just extending the CTC, but these CTC expansions, but really making them permanent. So we hope we can work together. And if you have stories from families about the child tax credit benefit and its significance for them, please share those stories with us. Please share them with your own members of Congress. Please share them with local lawmakers and state lawmakers, so everyone can see just how important this benefit is. And likewise, if you hear information about the program that it might not be working particularly well for certain families, please share that information with us, as well as your own members of Congress and representatives, so that we can try and improve this policy moving forward. Next slide. We know, and one of the our goals here is, we know that if all children who are eligible actually access this benefit and it becomes permanent, it will really significantly reduce poverty and reduce racial disparities in child poverty. So our friends at the Columbia Center on Poverty and Social Policy have estimated the impact of on poverty of this child tax credit expansion if it's made permanent, and if all children who are eligible actually get the benefit. And if that happens, then they expect a child poverty overall to fall by 45%. They expect child poverty among Black children and Native American children to fall even more. So this can do a lot to support children and families in the United States. We just need to make sure that the policy really works as it should, and the families get it who need it, and that it's made permanent. Next slide. So now we'd love to hear from you. Happy to answer any questions about the policy or the rollout, or sort of what we're thinking about in terms of advocacy around making it permanent. And also really interested to hear anything that you've seen in your own communities about outreach to families, to get families to file taxes. Any particularly successful examples of outreach that you think are worth lifting up and sharing with others, so they can try and implement similar things in their own communities. But happy to answer any and all questions at this point.
Thank you all so much. This is great information, and I'm so glad you're sharing it with us. I'm going to first pull up a couple questions that have come up in the Q&A and in the chat. There are a few themes, some that I know we've been answering along the way, so we'll move past those, but a couple that came up about particular circumstances of families. One is just, what does it look like for a family that either doesn't have any earned income or that just has SSI and no additional income above that? What does it look like for them to file taxes?
So, in an ideal world, it would be a very simple process. But in the world we live in, it means they have to fill out basically the same form that anyone else needs to fill out. Luckily for families with no income or low incomes, there are lots of, as Siri and Alex said, lots of free tax filing options. So if families are comfortable using sort of using the internet and sort of navigating forms online, they can sort of go through these the IRS Free File program, or choose a program from the IRS Free File list of programs, and file their taxes that way. You know, when they report their income, they just report no income if they don't have any earned income. But for now, really, for families with no income or low incomes, tax filing is pretty similar to families with earned incomes. They just wouldn't have any W-2s and wouldn't have to report any actual income when they file their taxes.
Thank you. Another question that a few people asked is related to children who live in multiple households. So whether that's a shared custody situation where the parents alternate who claims the child, or just if a child has moved in with their other parent in the course of a year, how is that going to play out, or what resources are there for people to make sure the credit goes the right direction?
Yes, so that's absolute. Those are all circumstances in which we really want families to update their information using the IRS portal that they're going to create. And they said that they're going to publish that in July, the beginning of July. I think there's always a chance they put that up earlier because the first checks are expected to go out in July, and ideally families would be able to update their information before the first checks go out. But right, as it stands, the checks would automatically go to the tax filer who last claimed the child on their tax returns. So if parent A claimed them last year, but parent B wants to claim them this year, then they will both need to go into the portal and change the information and update it once that portal goes live, so that the checks can go to the right family member.
Thank you very much. And I think that that's a particular circumstance that a lot of people will be in, so that's good to know. Another two that might be related. One person asked about people who had filed their 2020 taxes but have been told it's still being processed. And they've been told their refunds will be processed in September 2021. Will they also have to wait until September before those tax credits start coming through? And related to that, there was another question about, I'm sorry, I'm losing track. About someone who was concerned, a person who's on the call today, working with someone who was concerned that she didn't want to file because she had student loans, that it might be, the money might be taken to pay her student loans rather than coming straight to her. So if people owe money to the government, is that child tax credit still going to come through?
Those are great questions. So the IRS is taking a long time to process paper returns in particular this year. There's a huge backlog in processing paper returns, which is one reason why there's been a big push among folks working with families and at VITA sites and elsewhere to file electronically. And so given those delays, you know, there are delays in families getting their refunds. I hadn't heard the specific issue around a specific statement around refunds going out only in September. I know that there's a lot of work being done right now to try and address those backlogs in processing paper returns. But you know, it's a good question about what would happen for those families who are still waiting for those returns to be processed. And I do imagine that in those circumstances, if they had filed a return in 2019, it would go, if their child tax credit would be delivered based on their 2019 returns, if their 2020 returns hadn't been processed yet, and then updated based on 2020 returns whenever the IRS begins processing it. But I'm not entirely sure how that would play out. Now, the second question was about the government intercepting tax refunds, for example, to pay off student loan debt. And unfortunately, that's something that can and does happen. There aren't protections against interceptions or garnishment of the child tax credit under current policy. That's something we're fighting for as we think about making this policy permanent. So, it would depend on the amount of the debt, whether a family would get any benefit from filing for the CTC this year. If it helps pay down that debt, obviously that could be helpful. And if we're hoping this is going to be a long-term program, I think ultimately there's value in filing taxes, even if a family doesn't expect to see money this year, because it will help them make sure that they see money down the road when they do file taxes again.
Thanks, Elisa. Oops, I did not mean to be moving slides. Trying to scroll through the questions. Sorry about that. There's a quick question about whether filing late would affect the amount of stimulus or tax credit that you receive. And then, since I think you can answer that one quickly, another question that two people have asked is about foster children and how this will reach the households foster children are in.
Yeah, so on foster children, foster parents are currently eligible for the child tax credit. So if they live with the child for more than 6 months of the year, they can claim it on behalf of the child. If the parent the birth parent lived with the child for more than 6 months of the year and the children entered foster care at some point, the birth parent could claim it for this year. So it really depends on the particular situation of the family and the child who can claim the child. But somebody should be able to claim the child. On the sorry, Kaylin, what was the first question? Was what exactly?
About whether filing late would affect the amount that families get.
Yeah, it should not. Filing late should not affect the total refund that a family is expected to get.
Okay, great. And we have a question here about undocumented immigrants. So PJ wrote, undocumented immigrants cannot legally work, cannot open a bank account, cannot apply for an ITIN number, therefore would not be able to file taxes. Is there another way to help them?
So actually, undocumented immigrants can file taxes. It may be a more complicated process. It certainly is in terms of they need to apply for an ITIN number, the individual tax identification number, when they file taxes for the first time. But if someone is undocumented, like anyone else, they would need to sort of track the documentation of their income over the course of the year, fill out their tax return, and then append to that tax return an application for an ITIN and send that all in to the IRS to get processed. If someone doesn't have an ITIN number already and so has to apply for an ITIN number this year, that means they need to submit the application via paper, not electronically, and submit the tax return via paper, not electronically. There's currently a backlog processing not just paper tax returns, but also ITIN applications. However, the IRS is obligated, right? This is an entitlement to families with kids and who have Social Security numbers. So, I think the bottom line is that it might take a little bit longer for a parent who hasn't filed taxes before and doesn't have an ITIN number to do so this year, and get the CTC, but they should still be able to get it.
Thank you. We have a question about whether a legal guardian can file for this benefit for a child in their care with no blood relationship. How will that work? Yeah, answer that one and then we'll go to some of the others.
I think basically if they have legal custody of the kid, they're considered a parent. And so they'll be able to claim it. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. We have a specific question about if a mom is going through domestic violence and moves out of the house with the children, how can we help her get the credit if she had previously been filing taxes with her spouse?
So that's something that is sort of a circumstance and a situation that we're concerned about and trying to think through with our partners in terms of how to make the policy work for families in those circumstances. I think for this year, if she had previously been filing jointly, really the question is whether she filed her 2020 taxes with her husband. And if she did not, then she should file them separately, and then she can claim the kids for 2020. And if she did not, I'm not sure that there's a solution for this year, but tax lawyers would know better than us. And so I would really encourage the family to seek out support from legal services providers in their communities who will know the answers.
Thank you. All right, I think we're going to take one last question before we get to the updates we need to wrap up today. So another question that had been typed in is, would there be any benefit to someone opting out of the early payments?
So it's really sort of an individual choice and question of individual preference here. If a family, if someone opted out of advanced monthly payments, that just means they would get the full benefit in a lump sum at tax time at the end of the year. And I could certainly imagine some families who prefer that. We know lots of families like to use the large refunds to do things, like put money away in savings or sort of take on larger purchases for their home. I think the advantage of getting it obviously in advance is that might help families pay down debt and reduce their need to take on new debt over the course of the year. And we know that a lot of families use their refunds to pay off debt. So that one of the advantages of getting it monthly is that they can kind of eliminate the need to take on some debt in the first place that many families wind up using their refunds to pay off.
Okay, thank you so much. There's one more question that was just typed into the chat, so I'm hoping you are in the Q&A, so I'm hoping you can type an answer to that while we go on to our updates for the last few minutes of the webinar. Thank you. This is such an important conversation, and from all the questions, we can just tell that people are ready to help families on the ground and want to know all the details. So thank you very much. I am going to move into, oh, you have a couple slides of resources, so I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
These are just, they're really for folks to turn to once the PowerPoints are sent out after the meeting. Just some briefs and blog posts that might be helpful with background on the child tax credit, and then a little bit more information on the next slide about the coalition.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. We have some updates to share from CSSP and from the Alliance. So a little bit more about CSSP. We have a slide like that at the end of the slideshow as well. And you'll get all these in your email, or you'll get a link and then it will be posted there tomorrow or Monday. Okay, so I'm going to share some updates. This week, CSSP, along with partners, including the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, NCAN, the National Family Support Network, and Prevent Child Abuse America, released some guidance about making the most of the new federal investments in child abuse prevention. So some of our thoughts about how you can use the new community-based child abuse prevention increased funding, or CDCAP funding, to both to build out how well families are being served in your states overall, but also to have a particular focus on equity and anti-racist strategies to make sure that families that have not been reached with previous CDCAP investments would be better served, and that communities would be helping to develop and find the services that are right for them. So we were very pleased that the guidance from the Children's Bureau, the program instruction, also includes a very strong focus on equity and anti-racism, and hope that our suggestions and considerations will be helpful. If you are a CDCAP lead, this applies directly to you. If you're not a CDCAP lead, this is something to take to your CDCAP lead to open up conversation about how you could be part of the work that they're going to do in using these new resources and making the best possible use of them. And Martha, I know as the Alliance being another partner, you wanted to chime in here as well.
Well, we've just been having some conversations with our membership about these opportunities so the members can share amongst themselves about their ideas and innovations and ways that they can support this. We had our first conversation this morning, and it was really a great conversation. Also, every Friday, our policy director, Jim McKay, has a conversation with our membership. So if you're thinking about your own organization and how you may have a partnership with CVCAP in your communities, this guidance document that has been released is really helpful. So I just encourage you to access that.
Great, thanks, Martha. It looks like I might not have actually put the link on this slide that I thought I did. So you can go to our website. It is posted there, and it is posted on the Alliance and on Prevent Child Abuse America's website. It's out there in the world, but if you can't find it, shoot me an email. I will get it to you. A couple other updates from CSSP. Next Tuesday, we have a really exciting event that I hope many of you will listen into. It's part of our Upend project about rethinking the child welfare system, but this event in particular is How We End Up, Black Feminist Dreams for the Future. It looks like a really exciting panel, and really talking about reimagining what systems could look like so that a child welfare intervention would never be needed as a possibility for how we support families and keep children safe. So I encourage you to check that out. We are launching a new series next week. My colleague, Dr. David Willis, will be talking to different partners in the field on a monthly basis. We're calling it Willis and Friends, Early Relational Health Conversations, and talking about what their work is doing that's helping to build out those foundational relationships we know are so critical in the first 3 years of life. The first episode will be next Wednesday. I actually didn't get the link in time, so we hope that folks will join. It's going to be a live stream. You don't need to register in advance. So keep an eye on CSSP's social media and on our website for that information. It will be next Wednesday, May 19th, with a panel of partners from Reach Out and Read. Another opportunity that crossed many of our desks this week that we wanted to share is that the IDEO.org, with funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, is seeking applications for people who want to join the CARE constellation, which will be people re-envisioning an inclusive, equitable, universal childcare system. If this is something you have thoughts and feelings about, I encourage you to check out their website and think about whether you could apply with a team to be part of this CARE constellation over the next year. Applications are due June 17th. And another recent resource from CSSP is about 5 ways to better serve adolescents and young adults through the Family First Prevention Services Act. We know that child welfare systems are making or starting to implement their plans for implementation of Family First, and really want to think about the ways that this can greatly improve how we serve adolescents and young adults in those systems. Okay, those are all my updates, and I'll hand off to Martha.
Well, I just have a couple of quick updates today. The first one is that our training of trainers events, open registration events are coming up. 2, one in September and 1 in December. And you have the registration links here, and I think we'll put those into the chat. And the final thing is that our Birth Parent National Network has a webinar coming up, and it is on the topic of the impact of parent voice. It's on May 27th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, and we're going to put a flyer in the chat for you to get more information about that. But I hope you will join us for that webinar on May 27th. And that's all for today. Thanks everyone for the presenters. I really enjoyed hearing what you had to share today. It's very important information, and it's always great to hear that, and also to be able to share it with others.
Thank you all very much. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Martha. I know you had to rush through your updates a little bit, so thanks for that. And as always, it's great to see everybody on here, and we will be in touch about more opportunities to strengthen families. Thanks, everyone.